Anyone capable of dethroning Oleksandr Usyk? With an immaculate 23-0 record, Usyk had carved his name into history as a master technician, a fighter whose brilliance had left even his fiercest critics grasping at straws. Yet, as the years passed, a whisper of doubt began to creep in. Could there be a man who could topple this indomitable force? Eddie Hearn, the ever-charismatic promoter, thought there might be. But his answer was as surprising as it was intriguing. Usyk's ascent had been nothing short of legendary. A name now synonymous with perfection, the Ukrainian's journey had been marked by victories that seemed as inevitable as the sun rising in the east. Back in 2018, when he unified all the cruiserweight belts with a jaw-dropping victory over Murat Gassiev, the world took notice. Then came the spectacle against Tony Bellew, a fight that ended in devastation for Bellew and served as a chilling reminder of Usyk's lethal capabilities. It wasn't long before Usyk turned his gaze toward the glamour division, heavyweight boxing. He debuted with routine victories over Chaz Witherspoon and Derek Chisora, but these wins were mere stepping stones. The real test came when he stood across the ring from Anthony Joshua, a fighter many deemed too strong, too powerful, and simply too big for Usyk to handle. Critics doubted, fans speculated, and the boxing fraternity buzzed with predictions of Usyk's imminent downfall. Yet, when the bell rang, Usyk showed the world why he was a generational talent. In back-to-back bouts, he dismantled Joshua with clinical precision, outthinking and outmaneuvering the Watford powerhouse. Each jab, each feint, each movement spoke of a fighter operating on a different plane of understanding. The doubters fell silent, replaced by a chorus of admiration. But Usyk's path was far from over. As the world reeled from his victories over Joshua, a fresh challenger emerged in the form of the ferocious Daniel Dubois. Usyk met him with the same unyielding determination and dispatched the rising star with a display that left little doubt about his supremacy. And then, as if to cement his status as one of the greatest, he stepped into the ring with Tyson Fury in 2024 for a showdown that electrified the sport. The bout against Fury was a clash of titans, a fight etched into the annals of boxing history. Usyk edged out a split decision victory in their first encounter, only to return 7 months later and widen the gap in their rematch. It was during this time that he made a difficult decision, relinquishing the IBF title to Dubois to prioritize his rematch with Fury. Each choice, each step, seemed to fortify Usyk's legacy, making it increasingly hard to imagine anyone dethroning him. And yet, Hearn had his eyes on someone he believed could do the unthinkable. Enter Jai Opetaia, a fighter whose quiet demeanor belied his thunderous potential. Jai is humble, Hearn remarked in an interview, his voice brimming with conviction. He's committed to the cruiserweight division, but for me, Usyk is one of the best of all time. He became undisputed at cruiserweight, then moved up and became undisputed at heavyweight. The medium focus for Jai is every belt in his division, but the long term? That's Usyk. Opetaia, the consensus king at 200 pounds, carried the IBF and Ring magazine titles with a quiet confidence. In 2022, he dethroned Mary's Breedis in a fight that cemented his status as a force to be reckoned with. Yet, his pursuit of unification bouts had been met with frustration. The question loomed, would he ever have the chance to prove his worth against the sport's finest, or was he destined to chase shadows in a division reluctant to unify? For now, Opetaia remained a cruiserweight, a fighter biding his time as he carved out his legacy. The expectation was clear, he would eventually step up to heavyweight, following in Usyk's footsteps. But time was not on his side. Usyk, now 38 years old, seemed poised to leave the ring before Opetaia's rise could culminate in a clash of eras. The possibility of a future showdown hung tantalizingly in the air, a what if that kept fans speculating. As Hearn spoke, his words carried a weight that resonated with both excitement and uncertainty. I believe Jai is the only fighter who can give Usyk a real fight over the next 12-18 months, he said, a hint of urgency in his tone. For now, though, the story remained unwritten. Would the quiet king of cruiserweight rise to meet the masterful conqueror of two divisions, or would fate keep them on parallel paths, never to intersect? The answer lay somewhere in the future, hidden behind the ever-turning pages of boxing's unfolding narrative. The story of Oleksandr Usyk and Jai Opetaia lingered in the air like a storm cloud waiting to burst. The prospect of a fight between the two, though distant, seemed to captivate anyone who dared to dream about it. The arena buzzed with energy as boxing enthusiasts and experts alike debated a question that had begun to haunt the sport's upper echelons. Was there but time, as always, was both an ally and an enemy? For Usyk, it was a constant reminder that his days at the top were numbered. For Opetaia, it was a ticking clock, urging him to rise before the opportunities slipped away. Opetaia's rise in the cruiserweight division had been nothing short of spectacular. The fight that crowned him king, his victory over Mary's Breedis, was the kind of gritty, career-defining performance that boxing purists lived for. Bloodied but unbowed, Opetaia showcased not just his physical prowess but the mental fortitude that separated great fighters from the truly elite. It wasn't just about skill, it was about heart. The kind of heart that made people wonder if he might just be the one to end Usyk's reign. But in the boxing world, talent alone was never enough. Politics, timing, and sheer luck often played as much of a role in defining a fighter's career as their ability in the ring. And for Opetaia, the road to unification had been paved with obstacles. While he held the IBF and Ring magazine titles, the other belts remained tantalizingly out of reach. Negotiations with rival champions had stalled, each side unwilling to budge, each promotion prioritizing its own interests over the purity of the sport. Opetaia was left in limbo, a king with an incomplete crown. Meanwhile, Usyk's journey continued to defy expectations. Even at 38, he moved with the fluidity of a man half his age. His mind remained sharp, his reflexes seemingly untouched by time. Yet the toll of a career spent fighting the best was undeniable. Every punch he absorbed, every round he fought, was another reminder that the end was nearer than it appeared. But if Usyk felt the weight of time, he never showed it. His focus was singular, to cement his legacy as one of the greatest fighters to ever lace up gloves. Aegis Klimas, Usyk's longtime manager, spoke with the conviction of a man who had seen his fighter defy the odds time and time again. A rematch with Dubois for the undisputed titles is the only fight left, Klimas insisted, his voice firm. And perhaps he was right. After all, Dubois, though vanquished once, had reclaimed the IBF title and was eager to prove that the first loss had been a fluke. A second fight between the two would undoubtedly draw massive attention, reigniting the debates and rivalries that fueled boxing's enduring appeal. But Eddie Hearn saw things differently. His vision extended beyond the immediate future, beyond Dubois, and into the realm of what could be. He couldn't shake the feeling that Opetaia was the answer to the question no one had dared to ask: who could truly test Usyk? He's got the tools, Hearn said in interviews, his eyes alight with the possibility. He's got the heart, the skill, and the hunger. That combination is rare. And if anyone can push Usyk, it's Jai. Opetaia, for his part, remained grounded. He was a man who let his fists do the talking, a fighter who cared more about actions than words. When asked about a potential fight with Usyk, he didn't give in to hyperbole. He's one of the best to ever do it, Opetaia admitted, his respect for Usyk evident. But if the opportunity comes, I'll be ready. That's all I can say. The quiet confidence of Opetaia stood in stark contrast to the boisterous world of boxing. While others chased headlines and sound bites, he focused on the craft, honing his skills with an intensity that left those in his camp in awe. His victories were not just wins, they were statements. Each fight was a declaration that he belonged at the top, that he was a force to be reckoned with. Still, the question loomed, would he get his chance? Would the stars align in such a way that the quiet king of cruiserweight could challenge the pound-for-pound king of the sport? Or would circumstances, as they so often did in boxing, conspire to keep them apart? For now, the future remained uncertain. Usyk's legacy seemed untouchable, his reign unshakable. But in the shadows, Opetaia waited, his potential growing with each passing day. The idea of their clash was more than a fight, it was a collision of eras, a meeting of two men whose paths were destined to intertwine. Or were they? The answer was still out there, waiting to be written. And as the boxing world held its breath, one thing was certain: the story of Oleksandr Usyk and Jai Opetaia was far from over. The anticipation surrounding Oleksandr Usyk and Jai Opetaia simmered like a cauldron, the pressure building with each passing day. Fans debated endlessly on social media, in bars, and around dinner tables. What would happen if the two met in the ring? Could the tactical brilliance of Usyk withstand the raw hunger of a younger, unrelenting Opetaia? The questions buzzed in the minds of boxing aficionados, a never-ending hum that refused to be silenced. For Usyk, the allure of retirement grew stronger with every fight. He had nothing left to prove, not to his fans, not to his doubters, and certainly not to himself. He was a man who had conquered not just one weight class, but two. He had silenced the skeptics, rewritten the rule book, and inspired a generation of fighters who saw in him the blueprint for greatness. Yet, something about the idea of a challenge stirred a flicker of intrigue in him. He had always thrived on adversity, on the impossible odds that others shied away from. But even the greatest champions are human. In private, away from the cameras and the lights, Usyk's body began to whisper the truths that every fighter eventually hears. His knees ached on cold mornings. His reflexes, while still sharp, were not as instantaneous as they once were. Training camps grew harder, recovery longer. His team, ever protective, urged him to think of his legacy, his health, his family. And yet, the fighter within him resisted the notion of stopping. Retirement might have loomed, but the fire in his heart had not yet dimmed. Across the world, Opetaia was living a different reality. Where Usyk had achieved everything, Opetaia was still building, brick by brick. He spent long hours in the gym, his focus unshakable, his drive unmatched. To those who knew him, it wasn't just his talent that stood out, it was his sheer willpower. The setbacks he had faced, the stalled negotiations for unification fights, the political labyrinth of boxing, it all only made him more determined. In interviews, his answers were always measured, almost maddeningly humble. "I'm just focused on what's in front of me," he'd say, brushing off attempts to draw him into the hypothetical. But in his eyes there was something else. A quiet hunger. A belief that one day he would stand in the ring with Usyk, and when that day came, he would be ready. Eddie Hearn, ever the visionary, saw the makings of a mega fight. The seasoned promoter had a knack for identifying matchups that captured the imagination of fans. And this one? This one had all the makings of a classic. "The storyline writes itself," Hearn said in an interview, his voice tinged with excitement. "The master versus the rising star. The pound-for-pound king against the young lion. It's the kind of fight you dream about." But boxing, as always, was a sport of complications. Between Usyk's obligations and Opetaia's own path at cruiserweight, the stars would have to align in a way they rarely did. And then there was the question of timing. Usyk was nearing the twilight of his career, while Opetaia was still finding his footing. Would their trajectories cross before it was too late? The whispers of a potential matchup began to grow louder. Fans clamored for it, analysts speculated endlessly, and even Usyk's camp couldn't ignore the murmurs. Aegis Climas, ever the pragmatist, acknowledged the buzz but remained cautious. "Usyk has done everything in this sport," Climas said in an interview. "If this fight happens, it will be because it makes sense for him, not because of pressure." Opetaia, on the other hand, stayed quiet. He knew better than to get caught up in the hype. For now, his focus remained on his division, on unifying the belts that had eluded him. But in the quiet moments, when the cameras were off and the world wasn't watching, he allowed himself to dream. He pictured himself standing across the ring from Usyk, the arena packed, the energy electric. He imagined the sound of the bell, the first exchange, the way it would feel to test himself against the very best. The boxing world continued to spin, each day bringing new headlines, new twists, and new possibilities. Usyk, ever the enigma, remained tight-lipped about his plans. Would he fight Du Bois again? Would he consider Opetaia? Or would he choose to walk away, his legacy intact, his head held high? And then there was Opetaia, a man with everything to gain and nothing to lose. As he trained, as he fought, as he waited, the whispers grew louder. Would he ascend to heavyweight in time to challenge the legend? Or would the opportunity slip through his fingers, a dream unfulfilled? The answer, as always, lay in the future, a future that held the potential for greatness, for heartbreak, for history. The story of Oleksandr Usyk and Jai Opetaia was not yet finished. In many ways, it had only just begun. The tension in the air surrounding a potential clash between Oleksandr Usyk and Jai Opetaia only grew thicker as the months passed. It was the kind of tension that boxing thrived on, the tantalizing unknown, the possibility of witnessing something extraordinary. Fans speculated endlessly, their imaginations running wild with scenarios of how such a fight might play out. But for the fighters themselves, the speculation was just noise. Their realities were far more grounded. For Usyk, the immediate future seemed clear, even as questions loomed about his long-term plans. A rematch with Daniel Du Bois for the undisputed titles was the most logical next step, and it was a fight that would not only draw massive attention but also cement his already unparalleled legacy. Du Bois, with his youth and power, represented a real challenge, but Usyk had faced and overcome such challenges before. And yet, despite the clarity of his next move, a part of Usyk couldn't ignore the growing chatter about Opetaia. In his private moments, Usyk often reflected on his career, a journey that had taken him from the streets of Ukraine to the pinnacle of the boxing world. He thought about the fights that had defined him, the moments that had tested him. He thought about the doubters, the naysayers who had once said he was too small to compete at heavyweight. And he thought about how, time and again, he had proven them wrong. But with each passing day, he also thought about the clock ticking down on his time in the sport. The thought of retiring undefeated, of leaving the ring as a legend, was tempting. But so too was the thought of one last challenge, one last fight to remind the world why he was the best. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Jai Opetaia was living in a different kind of reality. The cruiserweight champion was locked in a relentless pursuit of greatness, his focus laser-sharp. Every training session, every sparring match, every fight was another step on the path he had chosen for himself. He had tasted the sweetness of victory, but he craved more. The thought of unifying the cruiserweight division consumed him, but in the back of his mind, the idea of stepping into the ring with Usyk was never far away. Opetaia's team, like Usyk's, was acutely aware of the complexities involved in making such a fight happen. The politics of boxing, the logistical hurdles, the sheer timing of it all, it was a delicate dance, one that required patience and persistence. But they also knew that if the opportunity presented itself, Opetaia would be ready. His preparation was meticulous, his determination unyielding. To his team, there was no doubt that he could hold his own against the pound-for-pound king. Eddie Hearn, ever the showman, continued to stoke the flames of possibility. In interviews and press conferences, he spoke about the fight with a mix of excitement and conviction. "This is the fight that needs to happen," he would say, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. "It's the kind of fight that defines eras, that brings the sport to new heights. Usyk is a legend, but Jai is the future. And when the past meets the future, magic happens." The fans, too, played their part. Social media buzzed with posts and comments, each one adding fuel to the fire. Some hailed Usyk as unbeatable, a fighter whose skill and experience would overwhelm any challenger. Others pointed to Opetaia's youth, his hunger, his unshakable resolve, as reasons why he could be the one to finally topple the Ukrainian giant. The debates were passionate, the opinions divided, but one thing was certain: the prospect of the fight had captured the imagination of the boxing world. And yet, as the chatter grew louder, the fighters themselves remained focused on the present. For Usyk, that meant preparing for his next bout, whether it was against Du Bois or another contender. For Opetaia, it meant continuing his reign at cruiserweight, solidifying his legacy in his division before making the inevitable move to heavyweight. But even as they focused on their individual paths, the shadow of their potential clash loomed large. The story of Oleksandr Usyk and Jai Opetaia was one of contrasts: the seasoned veteran versus the rising star, the master tactician versus the relentless warrior. It was a story of timing, of opportunity, of fate. And while the ending remained unwritten, the possibilities were endless. Would Usyk's brilliance shine one last time, proving that even the brightest of stars can burn longer than expected? Or would Opetaia's rise signal the dawn of a new era, his victory a passing of the torch from one generation to the next? The answers lay in the future, hidden behind the veil of time. For now, all the world could do was wait and wonder. The air of uncertainty surrounding the potential showdown between Oleksandr Usyk and Jai Opetaia became a quiet undercurrent in the world of boxing. While no official talks had begun, the idea was impossible to ignore. Fans called it a dream match, while analysts dissected every possible angle, weighing strengths, weaknesses, and strategies. But for all the noise outside the ring, the two men at the heart of the speculation were living vastly different realities. For Usyk, the familiar rhythm of preparation continued. His days were filled with grueling training sessions, tactical drills, and the constant drive for perfection. Though he was nearing 40, his dedication had never wavered. In every session, there was a focus and need to keep proving that he wasn't just a champion but a master of his craft. His team, loyal and protective, knew he had nothing left to prove. But Usyk's hunger for competition wasn't born of necessity. It was born of something deeper, something intrinsic. He thrived on the challenge, the struggle, the unknown. The whispers of retirement reached him often, but they were just that, whispers. The allure of walking away as an undefeated two-weight world champion, a man who had defied the odds and etched his name into the annals of history, was strong. Yet the fighter in him struggled with the idea of stepping away. Could he truly walk away knowing there were still questions left unanswered, challenges left unexplored? Meanwhile, Opetaia's rise continued like an unstoppable force. Though he wasn't a household name yet, within boxing circles, he was viewed as a phenomenon in the making. Every fight was a performance, every victory a statement. The way he dismantled his opponents was clinical, his combinations sharp and precise, his footwork eerily efficient. His potential felt boundless, but for Opetaia, potential alone wasn't enough. He wanted more, needed more. The cruiserweight division, for all its challenges, felt increasingly like a stepping stone towards something greater. He spoke sparingly about the possibility of fighting Usyk, careful not to get caught up in speculation. But his actions in the ring told a different story. There was an intensity in the way he fought, a statement in every punch he threw. It was as if he was preparing not for his current opponents but for someone far greater. And in truth, that wasn't far from reality. In the back of his mind, he was always thinking about the next step, the transition to heavyweight, the climb to a division where the giants roamed, and possibly, a meeting with the pound-for-pound king himself. Eddie Hearn's voice remained a persistent one in the conversation. As a promoter, he had a talent for spinning narratives, for turning fights into stories that resonated beyond the sport. This fight would be historic, he said in yet another interview, the passion in his voice evident. Usyk is already a legend, and Jai has the makings of one. What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? That's what this fight could answer. But even Hearn knew the challenges that lay ahead. Boxing, for all its glory, was a sport riddled with complexities. The logistics of arranging a fight of this magnitude were daunting. Would Usyk, at this stage in his career, take the risk of fighting a younger, hungrier opponent? Would Opetaya's camp push for such a fight before he had fully established himself at heavyweight? And perhaps most importantly, would the timing align? The months rolled on, and as they did, the buzz around the potential matchup grew louder. Fans began to demand it, petitions circulated online, and debates raged about who would emerge victorious. Usyk's camp, while outwardly dismissive of the chatter, couldn't ignore the growing noise. Aegis Climas, ever the strategist, understood the value of such a fight. "It's not about whether Usyk can beat him," Climas said. "It's about whether the fight makes sense for Usyk, for the sport, for everyone involved." Opetaya, true to form, kept his head down and continued to work. The cruiserweight division still held challenges for him, belts he wanted to unify, opponents he wanted to conquer. But the whispers of heavyweight grew louder, and with each dominant performance, the calls for him to move up grew harder to ignore. His team began to plot the transition carefully, knowing that a move to heavyweight was no small feat. The division was filled with giants, men who outweighed him by 30, 40, even 50 pounds. But Opetaya's confidence in his ability to adapt never wavered. As the potential paths of Usyk and Opetaya continued to edge closer, the boxing world held its breath. Would the stars align? Would Usyk, the master craftsman, take on the young lion? Would Opetaya, the rising star, step into the ring with one of the greatest of all time? The questions lingered, unanswered but ever present. And then, in a moment that sent shockwaves through the sport, Usyk himself addressed the speculation. In an interview, his words were measured, his tone calm. "Opetaya is a great fighter," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. "Maybe one day, we will meet. Who knows? Boxing is full of surprises." The world latched onto his words, dissecting them for meaning, for intent. Was it a challenge? A possibility? Or simply a way to stoke the flames of curiosity? No one knew for sure, but one thing was certain: the story of Oleksandr Usyk and Jai Opetaya had just taken an intriguing turn. Would their paths finally cross, or would fate have other plans? The answer, as always, lay ahead, shrouded in the mystery of what was yet to come.